The glass doors of the bank slid open and a man walked in. His shoes clicked softly on the shining marble floor, and the cool air wrapped around him as if welcoming him in. He looked sharp, carrying his briefcase with confidence, every step calm and steady. This was not his first meeting, and he knew his worth. He had worked too hard, built too much, and earned every right to be here. His appointment was confirmed, his papers ready, and his time was valuable. He sat down expecting nothing less than professionalism. But as the minutes passed, he noticed something strange. A man in a gray suit arrived after him and was quickly ushered inside. Then a woman, chatting on the phone, barely stopped at the desk before being let in. Meanwhile, he was still sitting there. No updates, no attention. Something was wrong. Why was he the one left waiting? He adjusted his watch and told himself to be patient. After all, delays happened. But the pattern was too clear. Every new person who came in seemed to be treated as a priority, while he sat quietly by the window. The receptionist, with her neat bun and blank expression, barely gave him a glance. Her tone with him was flat, almost cold. Yet the moment someone else walked in, her posture shifted, her smile softened, her voice became warmer. The difference was like night and day, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. His patience was wearing thin, though he kept his calm, reminding himself he had faced tougher rooms before. Time dragged on. 20 minutes became 30, then 40. He finally walked back to the desk and asked politely if his banker knew he was waiting. The receptionist didn't even bother with a real look. Her fingers tapped the keyboard lazily, her tone distant. She knows. It won't be much longer. The same empty line as before. He returned to his seat, gripping his briefcase tighter. People kept arriving, being greeted like old friends and passing straight through those frosted glass doors. Every single one of them, all except him. By now, nearly an hour had gone by, and his appointment time had long passed. Finally, he made up his mind. He stood, not in anger, not in haste, but with quiet resolve. Without asking, he walked past the desk, past the receptionist's weak protest, and pushed open the doors that led to the private offices. There she was, his banker sitting comfortably at her desk, not in a meeting, not on a call, just typing. Her eyes widened when she saw him, surprise flashing into irritation. "You should have waited to be called," she said, voice firm. "I did wait," he replied evenly. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, not because she allowed it, but because he chose to. The air in the room was heavy, the balance of power beginning to shift. She tried to brush it off, flipping through his file as if she hadn't just ignored him for more than an hour. Her words were polished but dismissive. She hinted that his application might not be strong enough, that stricter requirements stood in the way. It was clear she wanted to move quickly, to put him in a corner and end the meeting on her terms. But then the door opened. The sound of voices filled the room. The CEO and senior executives walked in. They carried themselves with authority, the kind that changed the entire atmosphere. And then, recognition lit up the CEO's face. His serious look broke into a wide smile as he approached. "Good to see you," he said warmly, shaking the man's hand with genuine respect. The banker froze, her eyes darting between them in shock. She had dismissed him as ordinary, but now she realized he was far from that. The CEO's voice shifted as he asked, "How long have you been waiting?" The man answered truthfully, "About an hour and a half." Silence fell. The CEO's smile faded, his tone sharp but controlled. "An hour and a half?" The words hung heavy in the air. The banker stammered, but excuses couldn't cover the truth. The CEO's face hardened. He turned to his team and gave clear orders. The loan was to be approved immediately and the mishandling would be dealt with. The balance had flipped completely. Respect was no longer optional. It was demanded by his very presence. When he finally stepped out of the bank, the sunlight felt different. His phone buzzed with a new email, loan approved. A small smile touched his face as he slipped it into his pocket. But this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about the quiet fight for respect that so many faced in silence. For more than an hour, he had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as though his time meant nothing. Yet the truth always has a way of surfacing. He walked toward his car, shoulders straight, head high. This was a reminder, not just for him, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel less. Never accept being brushed aside. Never let others decide your worth. If you have earned your place, take it. And if they try to keep you waiting, make sure they remember why that was a mistake. Because respect isn't handed out, it's claimed. And on that day, he claimed his. He checked his watch again. Only 15 minutes had passed, but it already felt longer. He shifted in his seat, trying to brush it off. Maybe the banker was just caught up in another meeting. Maybe it was a busy morning. That's what he told himself at first. But as the lobby filled and emptied, he noticed a pattern he couldn't ignore. A young man in a gray suit walked in, no more than 30, carrying nothing but his phone. He barely said 2 words at the front desk before a banker appeared, shaking his hand and leading him through the glass doors. Not 10 minutes later, a woman in a cream blazer stepped in. She didn't even mention an appointment. She just exchanged a friendly laugh with the receptionist, and within moments she too was shown inside. The man leaned back in his chair, eyes following the flow of people. His briefcase rested against his leg, heavy with documents he had spent nights preparing. Papers that told his story, years of work, hours of risk, proof of what he had built. He wasn't just here for himself. He was here representing every step he had taken to reach this point, and yet he was being treated like he didn't matter at all. The receptionist barely acknowledged him. Her voice to him was clipped, mechanical. "She'll be with you soon." No warmth, no effort. But when others arrived, everything changed. Her voice softened, her smile widened, her body leaned forward with interest. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. Polite indifference for him. Genuine warmth for others. He tried not to let it bother him. He was no stranger to rooms where respect was given unevenly. He had faced that before. Boardrooms where people underestimated him until he proved them wrong. He had learned to keep his composure, to let his work speak louder than anything else. But here in this lobby, the silence was heavier than words. Every laugh shared, every handshake exchanged was a reminder that his time was being measured differently. 20 minutes became 30. His fingers tapped lightly on the handle of his briefcase, each beat steady like a drum marking the passing minutes. Across the room, 2 men stood near the teller counters, chatting casually about investments and golf. Their tone was light, comfortable, like people who knew they belonged. That was the difference, belonging. Some people walked in with the assumption they had a place. For others, like him, it had to be proven again and again. He let his eyes drift back to the receptionist. Her posture changed again when a new face arrived, a woman in a navy dress with a designer bag. The receptionist's lips curved into a genuine smile, her tone suddenly bright and cheerful. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster," she said warmly as though greeting royalty. The woman barely paused before a banker appeared at her side, escorting her in without hesitation. No waiting, no soon, no empty promises. The man exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had now been there for nearly 40 minutes, his appointment time long gone. And yet the message was loud and clear. His presence wasn't a priority. He thought about standing up, about walking out, but stopped himself. This wasn't just about a meeting anymore. This was about something deeper, about being seen, about respect. And so he stayed seated, outwardly calm, but inside, the weight of every silent dismissal pressed heavier. He wasn't angry, not yet. But the seed of something stronger was already there, waiting. Because he knew this wasn't the end of the story. By now, the waiting had stretched far beyond what anyone would call reasonable. His appointment was set for 11 o'clock sharp. He was early, as he always was, 10 o'clock on the dot. But the clock on the wall now read close to 11:30. Still, his name hadn't been called. At first, he had tried to distract himself. He scrolled through his phone, answered a few emails, even glanced at the magazines neatly stacked on the low coffee table. But none of it eased the weight in his chest. Every time the frosted glass doors opened, his eyes lifted, half expecting his turn. But it was never him. It was always someone else. He pressed his lips together and drew in a quiet breath. Stay calm, he reminded himself. Losing patience wouldn't change anything. Still, his mind kept circling the same question. Why? Why was he being made to wait while others were ushered in? Why was his time treated as less valuable? Finally, he rose from his chair. His steps were steady as he approached the front desk again. The receptionist glanced up, her expression as flat as before. He asked politely, his voice calm but firm. "Has my banker been told I'm waiting?" She let out a soft breath, almost like a sigh of annoyance. Her fingers tapped the keyboard, her eyes never meeting his. She knows. She's just finishing with another client. He studied her face, searching for even a flicker of genuine concern. But there was none. She went back to typing as if his presence didn't matter. He pressed on, still controlled. "Do you have an estimate for when she'll be available?" Her shoulders lifted in a half shrug. It shouldn't be much longer, that was it. No apology. No offer to check again. Just the same vague word she had been using all morning. Soon. A word that carried no weight, no promise, no respect. He stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence speak louder than anything he could say. Then he returned to his chair, lowering himself slowly, his briefcase resting by his side once more. Across the lobby, his eyes caught on a small moment that said everything. A teller was laughing with an older gentleman in a golf shirt. Their voices carried just enough for him to hear. The man chuckled. She doesn't even need an appointment. I told her to just walk in. The teller grinned. Oh, for Mrs. Lancaster, we always make exceptions. His jaw tightened. So that was it? Different rules for different people. Some doors opened with a smile. Others stayed closed no matter how long you knocked. He tapped his fingers lightly against his briefcase, a rhythm steady and sharp. An hour had passed now, and still he sat in the same place, invisible to the very people who had promised him professionalism. In that moment, a quiet decision formed inside him. This wasn't about a delay anymore. It wasn't about schedules or mistakes. This was about respect, and whether he was willing to keep sitting silently while it was denied to him. He sat for another 5 minutes, but they felt heavier than the entire hour before. The word soon echoed in his mind, hollow and meaningless. He looked around the lobby one more time. The seats that were once filled with people had emptied. Every person who had arrived after him had been taken care of. He was the only one left. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy floor, a man prepared, capable, and yet being treated like he didn't belong. A quiet fire burned inside him now. This wasn't just about waiting. It was about being ignored, as though his presence carried no weight. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The movement wasn't rushed or loud. It was deliberate, measured, the kind of action that made people look twice. His briefcase hung at his side, steady in his grip. Without hesitation, he walked toward the frosted glass doors at the back of the lobby. "Sir," the receptionist's voice called out behind him, sharper this time. But he didn't stop. He didn't even turn. Her words carried no authority over him anymore. He had given her every chance to do her job, and she had chosen not to. The glass door was cool beneath his palm as he pushed it open. A faint click echoed through the lobby as it swung wide, revealing a hallway lined with private offices. The air inside was quieter, thicker, like stepping into another world, one meant only for those considered important enough. He walked down the hall with calm steps, his eyes scanning the polished nameplates on each door. And then he saw her. The banker he had come to meet. She wasn't in another meeting. She wasn't on a call. She was sitting at her desk, perfectly comfortable, typing on her laptop. Papers were neatly stacked, a coffee mug rested by her side. She looked up, startled, her fingers pausing over the keys. Her surprise flickered into irritation almost instantly. "Mr. Bennett," she said sharply, her voice clipped. "You should have waited to be called." He met her eyes steadily, his tone calm but firm. "I did wait." The silence that followed was heavier than the air in the room. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Please take a seat." He sat, not because she gave permission, but because he chose to. Every movement of his was quiet, controlled. He placed his briefcase gently by his side, leaned back slightly, and folded his hands in his lap. For the first time, she seemed unsettled. The balance in the room had shifted. Her fingers twitched as she adjusted a stack of papers unnecessarily, trying to mask her discomfort. She forced a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I apologize for the delay. We've been very busy today." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. Busy. That was her excuse. Busy enough to ignore him for over an hour, while others without appointments walked straight in. He didn't argue, not yet. He only studied her. His expression unreadable, but his silence said more than words ever could. For the first time since he entered the bank, he wasn't the one waiting. She was, waiting to see how he would respond. The banker straightened her papers and tried to regain her composure. Her smile looked polite, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She was irritated by his presence. She flipped through his loan file, her tone professional but distant, almost dismissive. "Your finances look strong," she said, her words clipped. But you must understand, with the current climate, our criteria have become much stricter. We'll need additional guarantees before this application can even be considered." She didn't look at him as she spoke, just skimmed the pages as though she had already made up her mind. It wasn't a conversation. It was a dismissal wrapped in formality. He leaned back slightly, keeping his face calm, though inside he could feel the weight of every word. This wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about numbers. This was about being made to feel small, about being told he wasn't enough even when he had done everything right. And then, before he could answer, the air in the room shifted. The quiet hallway outside, which had been still moments before, filled with footsteps and low voices. The door to the office swung open and the atmosphere changed instantly. 3 men entered, each in tailored suits, their presence commanding without a word. The kind of men who carried authority just by walking into a room. At the front was someone he recognized immediately, Richard Langford, the CEO of Highland Crest Bank. Richard's eyes scanned the room, sharp and observant. The moment they landed on the man sitting across from the banker, his face lit up. Surprise gave way to recognition, and recognition bloomed into warmth. "Dorian," Richard exclaimed, breaking into a wide smile as he strode forward with his hand extended. "What on earth are you doing here?" The room froze. The banker's eyes widened, her face draining of color. Her hand, still holding the file, trembled slightly before she quickly set it down. The same man she had treated as an inconvenience, the client she had brushed aside, was someone the CEO greeted like an old friend. The man rose calmly, shaking Richard's hand firmly. "Good to see you, Richard," he said smoothly. "It's been a while." "Too long," Richard replied, clapping him on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "You're still running your firm, aren't you? Still growing?" "Still growing," came the quiet, steady reply. The 2 other executives exchanged quick glances, understanding more in silence than words could say. They had just walked into a situation where the balance of power had completely flipped. Richard finally turned to the banker. His smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. His eyes sharpened, his tone cooled. "How long has Dorian been waiting?" The question cut through the air like a blade. The banker opened her mouth, but no words came. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She glanced at Dorian, hoping he would stay silent. But he didn't. "About an hour and a half," he said evenly. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's jaw tightened, the faintest twitch betraying his anger. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. "An hour and a half," he repeated, as if testing the words himself. The banker shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting together on the desk. She tried to speak, fumbling for an excuse. There must have been a scheduling issue. Richard didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on Dorian, and his voice carried finality. "You should have called me directly," he said firmly. "I would have made sure you were taken care of." The man offered a small, knowing smile. "Didn't think I needed to." And in that instant, everyone in the room knew the power had shifted completely. The banker, who moments earlier held his future in her hands, was now exposed for her indifference. Her authority had vanished, replaced by silence and shame. The room that once dismissed him was now standing still, waiting on his words, his presence. And for the first time all morning, he wasn't the one waiting. Richard's smile had completely vanished now. The warmth he showed seconds ago had been replaced with a tone so sharp it made the air in the office feel heavier. He turned his full attention on the banker, his eyes narrowing just slightly, but enough to make her shift uncomfortably in her seat. "An hour and a half," he repeated slowly, his voice low but clear. "You had Dorian Bennett sitting out there for over an hour and a half?" The banker swallowed hard. Her face was pale, her carefully rehearsed professionalism slipping away like sand through fingers. There must have been some miscommunication," she stammered. "We've been very busy today and—" Richard cut her off with a simple glance. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His authority was in the weight of his silence. "Busy?" he said, his tone calm but layered with steel. "Too busy to honor a confirmed appointment? Too busy to show basic respect?" The other executives stood in the background, their faces tight, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. Nobody dared to interrupt. The room belonged to Richard now, and through him it belonged to Dorian. Richard leaned back slightly, shaking his head. "I've built this bank's reputation on trust and service. One wrong decision can undo years of that work. Do you have any idea what it looks like to keep someone like Dorian waiting as if his time has no value? The banker lowered her eyes, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She tried to open her mouth, but no excuse could cover the truth. The silence grew heavier, pressing on her like a weight she could no longer carry. Richard finally turned back to Dorian, his face softening just enough. "You should never have been treated this way," he said firmly. "Not here. Not in my bank." He reached for the loan file that sat on the desk, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the first few pages quickly before he closed it with a decisive snap. He didn't need to read further. "This loan," he said, his voice sharp again, "should have been approved the moment it crossed your desk. There is nothing questionable here. Nothing." He turned to one of the executives standing by the door. "Fast-track this application. I want approval on my desk by the end of the day. Actually, no, by this afternoon." The executive nodded immediately, scribbling a note in his leather planner. "Understood." The banker's mouth fell open slightly, her face flushing red. Just minutes ago, she had been the gatekeeper, speaking with authority, holding his future in her hands. Now, in a matter of seconds, her authority had been stripped away. Her decisions no longer mattered. Richard wasn't finished. He turned back to her, his gaze steady, unyielding. "Step outside," he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of a command. Her chair scraped softly against the polished floor as she stood. Her steps were shaky, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply walked out, the door closing behind her with a muted click. For the first time all morning, the office felt calm. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was filled with control, with clarity. Richard let out a slow breath, turning back to Dorian. "I don't know what happened out there," he admitted, "but I guarantee it won't happen again." Dorian held his gaze, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to speak. The shift in the room said it all. For once, he wasn't the one chasing respect. It had found its way to him. The executives lingered nearby, watching carefully, their eyes filled with something between respect and caution. They knew what had just happened was bigger than a simple meeting. It was a lesson, one that would echo through the walls of that bank long after this day was done. The office was quiet after she left. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. Richard sat across from him, hands folded, his expression steady but thoughtful. For the first time, there was no rush, no dismissal, no clipped words, only attention. The kind of attention he should have received from the very beginning. They spoke briefly about the loan. Richard promised the process would be completed that day. But more than that, he promised that the way he had been treated would not be forgotten or tolerated again. It wasn't just a promise of approval, it was a promise of accountability. When the meeting ended, Dorian stood with calm composure. He shook Richard's hand once more, then walked out with his briefcase in hand. The same receptionist who had brushed him off earlier looked up at him now with a face she couldn't quite mask, half nervous, half ashamed. He met her eyes only for a moment, not with anger but with quiet certainty. Then he pushed open the glass doors and stepped back into the world outside. The midday sun was bright, the air warm against his skin. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the morning finally lift. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A new email had arrived. Loan approved. He smiled. Not a smile of victory, but of confirmation. He had known his worth all along. This wasn't about luck or even about winning. It was about standing firm when others tried to reduce him, about refusing to shrink just because someone else thought he should. As he walked toward his car, he thought back to the hours he had spent in that lobby. The stares he felt, the cold tone, the word soon repeated again and again as though his time wasn't worth a real answer. That experience wasn't just about one receptionist or one banker. It was about something larger. Those quiet, invisible walls people build. Walls that tell some they belong while others must wait outside. But that day, the walls cracked. Respect was restored, and the banker who once dismissed him would never forget how quickly her position had shifted. This wasn't just a story about a loan. It wasn't even just about one bank. It was about dignity, about the silent battles people fight every day to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. Sometimes those battles are loud, but more often they are quiet. like sitting in a lobby while others pass you by. He knew the truth. Respect isn't a gift. It isn't handed out like a favor. It's something you claim, something you demand by refusing to be invisible. As he reached his car, he placed the briefcase on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. He just let the silence wash over him. Then he whispered to himself, almost like a promise, never again. Because he had learned something important that day. If you let people ignore you, they will. If you stay silent, they'll believe your voice doesn't matter. But if you walk through the doors they try to keep shut, you remind them who you are. And that reminder lasts far longer than any meeting. So the message was clear. Don't wait for permission to be seen. Don't let anyone decide your value. If they keep you waiting, if they try to make you small, stand tall and take your place. Because your time matters. Your presence matters, and your worth can't be denied unless you allow it. That day he walked out not just with alone approval, but with something much greater. Proof that silence only has power if you accept it. Respect was not given to him. He demanded it and he got it. And the next time anyone thought about overlooking him or anyone like him, they would remember why that was a mistake.